I'll just call to order the East Lansing City Council meeting of Tuesday, September 17th, 2019. Welcome, everybody. Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Byer.
Here.
Councilmember Draheim.
Here.
Councilmember Stevens.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Holman.
Here.
Mayor Meadows.
Here. The next item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Mr. Lahanas.
Your Honor, just one item we would request as an add-on, and that is approve street closures for the East Lansing High School Homecoming Parade on October 4th, 2019, from 5 p.m. to 6:15 p.m.
And that would go on as 4.6 on the consent agenda? Is that what you're requesting?
Yep.
Okay.
There you go.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda with that change?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Draheim, seconded by Councilmember Byer. Any other discussion or changes? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of 9/10/19. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Second.
It's been moved by the Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by Councilmember Draheim. Any changes to the minutes? Seeing none. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is just an announcement. All communications to council are on the city's website and in the online agenda packet. So please look there for any communications to council this week. And the next item is Ms. Drager. Communications for persons in the audience. And I do have a blue card from Alice. So I was giving you, like, you can get to the microphone first.
Thank you. I just wanted to personally convey enthusiasm for the appointment of Tom Fehrenbach. One thing George has done really well in this city is appointment of department heads. I was going through them in my head today. Jill Feldposh to Finance, Larry Sparks to the Police, Scott House to DPW, DeMar Boyd for the Income Tax, Jennifer to City Clerk's Office. This has just been a great run. And people who are, as I was just telling my mother on the phone, people who are really genuinely public servants, people who believe in the mission of public service. So that's exciting. People who respond and are just really attentive to detail. Second, I noticed there's less spam in the communications this week. I don't know if you all decided to do something, but I was going to make a suggestion, and that is if you want to get rid of the spam, you could put on your consent agenda an agreement to unsubscribe to specific things. I mean, it sounds weird. I don't really want you cleaning it and taking away stuff we might want to see, but I think we're also all tired of the spam. And so you could actually put on the consent agenda, unsubscribe to X, unsubscribe to Y, and you could do it. We could all see that you're doing it, and I think we might cheer. We've heard from Florida enough. I'll respond to the city manager's letter to the Eli Board of Directors after he's had a chance to let me know whether or not he wants to correct the problems in that letter. Otherwise, I'll just wait a day and go ahead and do that. On the Center City issue, I'm glad to see that the funds are finally going to be forthcoming. Glad to see City Council is moving in that direction to get the money. A problem I saw in the packet is that Mr. Bell appears to have signed the agreement with no date, and also with no notarization. So since it is a $125 million deal, I'd like to suggest we get him to date his signature and also have it notarized. I presume the same would be true for the city and the DDA and BRA. I guess BRA is not a party, DDA. And finally, I just wanted to ask whether or not the Merritt Road property had closed, because it's now been 30 days.
I think that on the agenda this evening is the authorization for the
No, that was
closure.
last time. The authorization for George to do the closing?
Yeah, I thought that was added to the agenda.
Last time.
That
The
was
city
last
attorney can give a report.
Oh, okay. So you will report on that? Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anybody else in the audience? Yes, step up.
John Boyce, I live at 520 North Harrison Road. Just want to speak about sidewalk closure. This is the third year now that we've had our sidewalk closed on Grand River between People's Church and Abbott Road. And with what I think is a unsafe crossing for a detour crossing in front of People's Church to make your way around it there. We still are littered with angle iron bases and broken sandbags for detour signs. I guess my comment to the council would be that I live here and I know how to get around that detour. I made it here tonight. But I see weekend visitors, alumni, football Saturdays, where people are trying to get through there. And I'm wondering if in future projects, if we could do a better job. And if I don't really see a contractor walking away from a big job if we require a protected walkway. So I'm concerned that we've put up with it this long and still can't get through there for what I think is for visitors to look like a friendly, walkable city. And I've spoken to others on the council and to Scott, and I know this is an ongoing problem, but I wonder if in the future we could avoid this by having some upfront details to get us through there.
Yeah, go ahead, George, because I know that we have an answer for this. So.
There's actually a plan, and I'm glad you raised the issue, but we've also raised the issue with the developer, and we expect to have a protected walkway in place in the coming weeks. So MDOT, the city, and the developer are working together to make certain we have a barrier-protected walkway that will stay on Grand River, that will take one of the lanes of traffic, and it will provide for safe passway for people to walk on the sidewalk. So that's something that we'd hoped would be in place at this point. It's not, but we hope to have that in place as shortly as possible. So people are working on it, and hopefully it will be in place shortly.
Thank you. Yeah.
Did you want to say something?
Well, I just want to thank you for bringing this. You brought it to transportation.
I have,
John also
yeah.
serves on our transportation commission and has brought this issue up many times, and we have talked about it with Scott. I think the other thing that I just want to echo him, and I know Public Works is talking about it, but it's just something I want us to think about with development, is the nature of the detour signs. We have a lot of these right now, so I know that, but what he's talking about, these sort of the angled orange, the kind of metal ones, they're problematic in the best of weather. In the winter weather, they are really problematic. Sandbags get broken, plows run into them, and they do cause issues with snow plows and people who are trying to have access. So I think, there are examples out there of the kind of the concrete-based ones. Scott has explained that in some cases those aren't the best, but in a lot of cases they are, and I think those are things we could be requiring.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, John.
Anybody else in the audience wanted to address council on any item, whether it's on the agenda or not off the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move on to communications from council members. Councilmember Stevens, anything this evening?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a plug again for our next coffee and conversation with the Human Relations Commission. It's going to be on LGBTQIA issues, and that'll be this Sunday, September 22nd, from 2 to 4 p.m. at Blue Owl Coffee. These have been great conversations so far, good attendance, and really, really great conversations. We've been moving through protected classes within the city of East Lansing, really getting a deep dive into some issues. Some great ideas have formed out of them, and so I highly recommend anybody in the community show up. They're very informal conversations, so you're not necessarily required to be there with something prepared, and there's not much of a program to it. It's more just community members getting coffee and having a good talk. So highly recommend it, and hopefully see you Sunday.
Councilmember Byer, anything? Councilmember Draheim?
I have 3 quick things. I want to echo congratulations to Tom and to George on that appointment. I think it's great and glad to see that happening. 2, I want to welcome our newest business to downtown, which sort of had a soft opening this week, Foster Coffee. I went in today. It looks amazing. It's great to have yet another wonderful coffee shop downtown, and make sure that you support them all. And 3, I just wanted to remind everybody about the event tomorrow night at the East Lansing Public Library. East Lansing talks about suicide and self-harm. It's at 6:00 p.m. tomorrow, Wednesday, September 18th. And it is open to anyone who wants to attend. So I think it's going to be a great conversation.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Deer is something that people are thinking about. And we will have a meeting next week. I'm going to read from the dialogue, which is on my desk. We will have a meeting on Thursday, September 26th at 7 p.m. at the Hanna Center to discuss, to hear from experts in deer management, and also to have a chance to voice your input on what you think we should do about deer. And I know half a dozen people or so have raised this issue with me over the past several weeks, and I will try to send them a pointer to this but I figured this would be a good thing to publicize. So if you're concerned about deer, please put next Thursday, September 26th on your calendar.
Okay, I just have one thing. During conversations today, it looks like the Red Cedar Renaissance project is proceeding forward, and I was advised that there was a request anyway for the city of Lansing to permit work to be conducted there on almost a 24/7 time frame. And I don't know whether our Department of Public Works has been involved in any discussions with regard to it, but I want to just mention that I remember the adjoining neighborhood during some construction projects down there complaining and us having to negotiate with the Frandor Shopping Center about the time frame in which a lot of activities were taking place. So that we don't have that problem in the future, I would ask that the city become involved in these discussions and find out what the real scoop is here so that we can avoid any complaints on noise. I think here our general operating procedure is, 7 to 7 or something like that, but I don't think anybody would have a problem with that, but we have a lot of apartments there, and we have an adjoining neighborhood, and we should be able to have a voice in how that construction will take place. That's all I have. Next item on our agenda is the City Manager's Report. Mr. Lahanis.
Thank you, Mayor. One special item to report, and that's this Friday, September 20th, at the East Lansing Public Library. We have East Lansing Welcomes the World. This is an annual event with the East Lansing Public Library and the city and Michigan State University having a special event to welcome international students and their families to the community. So this event is free. It has food, it has family activities, entertainment, lots of great stuff to do. And I would encourage any of our international students and families, if you have young children, whatever the situation, please come to the event and get to meet some of your neighbors, learn a lot more about the community, and receive a welcome from the city and the university, as well as some nice food. So hopefully we see people at 6:30 this Friday at the library.
Right. And the City Attorney's Report, Mr. Yaden.
Thank you, Mayor. No report other than I will update council on the Merritt Road land sale. I received a closing packet from the closing agent today. I reviewed it. There were a number of corrections that needed to be made to those documents. I advised the closing agent of that. They didn't get back to me in time for me to get them executed today, so that we should have them within the next day or two executed and sent off, and should close shortly.
Great. All right. The next item on our agenda is a special presentation. That's what it says. I guess we have this on the agenda,
Maybe
but we
standing
don't
up,
have
standing
and
up.
what's special about it is we actually don't have a special presentation.
That's an issue
All
with our new
right,
agenda.
let's make sure that we don't have that unless we have that on there. We are learning with the new agenda. The next item on the agenda then is the consent agenda.
Great.
Mr. Lahanis.
Thank you. We have the following items on the consent agenda for council's consideration. Item 4.1, approve the following appointments or reappointments to boards or commissions. Gabrielle Kindig to the University Student Commission for a full term ending September 30th, 2019. B, Helen Josephson to the University Student Commission for a full term ending September 30th, 2019. And C, Rachel Moore to the University Student Commission for a full term ending September 30th, 2019. Item 4.2, approve the Montgomery Drainage District Agreement. Item 4.3, approve an administrative order establishing electric skateboard parking locations and authorize the city manager to sign. Item 4.4, approve a date change for the October 15, 2019 discussion-only meeting to be moved to October 22nd, 2019. And the regular meeting scheduled for October 22nd, 2019 moved to October 29, 2019. Item 4.5, approve a date change for the public hearing on Ordinance 1462, originally scheduled for October 8th, 2019, to be moved to October 29, 2019. And add-on item 4.6, approve street closures for the East Lansing High School Homecoming Parade on October 4, 2019, from 5 p.m. to 6:15 p.m., with the street closures as detailed in the memo that council has been provided. The memo details will also be uploaded to iCompass at the conclusion of the meeting. Those are all the items on the consent agenda for council's consideration.
All right, does anybody wish any of these items removed to the business agenda? Is there a motion to approve?
I would like to ask that number 4.3 be removed to the business agenda, please. That's the electric skateboard
To the
business agenda.
business agenda?
I just have a couple of questions.
You can ask the questions, I think, without me.
Yeah, you can do that right now.
So I'm happy to ask the questions then if now is appropriate. So a couple of questions about the administrative order. It wasn't clear to me if, so they're going to collect a lot of data pretty quickly after they start deploying the scooters. And this came up at one of the DDA subcommittees, and Gotcha was there to make a presentation. And they would like to act on that data to potentially amend the locations, and they would like to do that relatively quickly, which I'm sympathetic to. And so one question is whether the council needs to see amendments to this administrative order, or whether staff can do it directly, or the city manager can do it directly.
So currently, it says that it has to be recommended by me and brought to council for approval. We actually had this discussion about trying to be more nimble if there was a way that that could be delegated to me. And under the current administrative order, we did not think that that was possible. So we're sympathetic, and I think the way it was drafted, it just brings it to council. So at this point, unless the city attorney thinks there's something we can do, are you looking to delegate that so we don't have to bring it back so staff can approve them? Or?
Well, I would be interested in that, but I haven't taken the temperature, so I don't know whether other people would be interested in that also.
And I would be willing to go either direction, so it's up to council how they want to handle that, but we would be willing to do it administratively or bring it back to council.
Can I ask a one question?
Yeah.
If that can be corrected, if there's language that can correct that in what we're voting on, then I'm open to you moving this to business agenda. But if there can't be, then
Normally, you wouldn't use an administrative order to change an ordinance. You'd have to change an ordinance by an ordinance change. So you would actually be trying to do that, so it wouldn't necessarily be in proper order and form.
So your understanding is that the ordinance requires all of these things to be done by council approval?
Yeah, it says so in the ordinance.
That would be clear then, okay.
Yeah, I would recommend that if there is a change in the ordinance that's necessary, then we'll just get an amended ordinance language, we'll get it on the agenda and take care of it that way, but there's no reason to hold this up, I don't think, at this point.
That's fine, and I guess I would be interested in seeing that ordinance amendment, because I think that would help things. And then a second question was about the second provision in the administrative order. It says for all locations outside of the DMV district, a licensed skateboard company is authorized to deploy or park electric skateboards anywhere that complies with the ordinance. So they don't need approval at all from the city?
What we thought was, and our experience was, the intensity of the use in the areas outside of the downtown district were very light. So that 1-2 scooters at a time they would have to comply with the scooters with the ordinance, which means they have to keep the sidewalk free. They can't block, they can't block all of the areas it says in terms of the ramps and all of that. But that we did not want to designate areas because it seemed overly cumbersome considering how many would actually be deployed in the neighborhoods, that it would be very, very light. So that's what we thought from our experience, that controlling it in the downtown was where the intensity of use was.
And that seems fine to me. Is it sufficiently clear in the administrative order that they don't have to seek approval from the city?
I'm comfortable with
Okay.
this wording.
All right.
They asked me about it before they published it.
So those are all the questions I had for that.
Did you have a question or a comment?
No, not that.
Okay.
And,
All right.
and then I have one other question about the consent agenda, which was 4.1, the approvals to boards and commissions. Those are full terms ending in a month? Should those be partial terms, or are the dates wrong? Okay.
Good catch.
And that's for all three of the appointments? Do we need an amendment to the agenda?
Yeah, when you move the consent agenda, say accept that for a partial term in 4.1. Each one of these would be a partial term.
No.
Oh, the
Full-
date.
full term ending.
Oh, you've got a full term.
ending in 2020.
Oh, without the September 30. Okay.
So I'll move approval of the consent agenda with amendments to item 4.1 to change the years from 2019 to 2020 in all three instances.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by the Mayor Pro Tem and seconded by Councilmember Byer to move an amended consent agenda. Any other discussion on this? Do you have something you want to say? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. The next item on our agenda is the business agenda. We don't have any public hearings this evening. We do have 3 business agenda items. The first item is to introduce and refer to the Planning Commission Ordinance 1471, an ordinance to amend the Property Maintenance Code and zoning ordinance to expand the house sitting exemption to persons not intending to return and to establish eligibility requirements for RO1 and RO2 rental restriction overlay districts.
I'll move approval of item 5.1 as read by the mayor.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Go ahead and discuss.
I'm actually going to move amendments to the draft ordinance.
Right, okay.
Yeah, there's one for everybody.
Are these already sorted?
Yes,
Okay.
they're not some of them aren't stapled, but they are. So I'll speak to this. This is, excuse me, a follow-on from our discussion.
That you have a second.
Oh,
You're
do I
gonna
need a
make
second?
motion to
You
amend.
Well, I first was going to discuss it, and then I would make a motion for an amendment, or no?
Probably have the amendment on the floor before you can talk about it.
I wasn't going to talk about the amendment yet. I was going to just talk about the original. and then-
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So what is on the agenda is a follow-on to our discussion-only meeting where we had some discussion about rental overlays and whether there was flexibility for the house sitting provision and also the necessity of having rental overlays in north of Saginaw and sort of in what context. And there was some discussion at our last meeting about the language I proposed at the time and what is on the agenda to meet some of those goals that I was trying to look at in terms of providing that flexibility. So what's on the agenda tonight was what was kind of following from what we discussed. I'm going to make a motion to move, I'm going to do them separately. A first amendment to section 1001.2, the exceptions. And we'd love to have a second for discussion.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it has been moved by Councilmember Draheim and seconded the amendment. So why don't you discuss your amendment?
So the proposed amendment, the original has some changes to the house sitting around temporary absences of owners. I'm proposing that as an amendment that the original language for that section number 2, house sitting, remain intact, no changes to that, but that we add an exception number 8. Non-owner occupancies for up to 1 year, and I'll read it, and you have the language in front of you all. Owners who need to vacate their premises for a limited duration but who do not intend to return to their property may permit up to 2 unrelated individuals or a family to occupy the premises without a rental license for a period of up to 1 year in any 5-year period by notifying the department in a form provided by the department the reason for the absence, the address of the owner's new domicile, the projected timeline for the sale or transfer of the property, and the identity of the unrelated individual or family who occupied the premises during the owner's absence. That is my proposed amendment.
Okay, did you want to discuss why you want to do
So the reason that I changed this, we had a lot of conversation at the discussion-only meeting, that basically what we were trying to get at is this issue of providing some flexibility for owners who have things that come up in their life. So we have already a house sitting exemption if somebody is is going on sabbatical, for example. But, kind of the reason for leaving town or needing to leave your house isn't always as kind of cushy as just I have another job or I have a sabbatical. Not everybody in this town works for the university. Sometimes people need to vacate their house and they may not be in a position to sell it right away. Either the market may be down, they may be going through a family change where they're making some decisions, marriage, divorce, change in custody, things like that. It has come up. I've heard these stories. where some flexibility in terms of retaining the property while they are making some of those decisions. In short, it comes up that people feel like they need this flexibility. I've heard it from a number of my constituents. And when the only opportunity is that they use the house sitting exemption, they have to say that they're going to return. But it's disingenuous. A lot of people do not plan to return. Sometimes I think people probably fudge that system. I don't know if they do or not, but I don't want people to be in that situation. I think that this allows for a little bit of flexibility. It is a pretty stringent and narrow one. It's only 1 year, whereas the house sitting exemption is up to 2 years. It still requires them to notify the department. It still requires all of the information, and after that period of time, they either need to sell it or the house sits vacant. So I think it just gives a little bit of flexibility for people who may be going through some things in their life and need a little bit of flexibility where they aren't left with maybe potentially holding 2 mortgages or a rent and a mortgage. So that's the nature of this one. It seemed like in my conversations with the city attorney, making this its own exemption made more sense than complicating the house sitting one, particularly since it's a different timeline, since it's only a 1-year allowance.
Okay, any other discussion on this? Go ahead.
I have a question for the city manager. So is there any concern about this in regards to inspections on what would normally be a rental property? Obviously, we do an inspection for what would be a normal rental license, but we wouldn't under this provision.
The house sitting is an exemption to that. So is there a concern about opening up an avenue for rentals that would not have inspections?
Yeah.
Is that your concern?
Yeah.
I mean, anytime we don't have inspections, I think it's a potential for risk. So I guess in general, I would say that our inspection program adds a lot of value and keeps people safer. So if we want to have our housing administrator who oversees rental housing add on to that with a more specific answer, but I guess that's my general answer.
I might just want to hear if it's an owner occupied previously. I would imagine the house is in good standing, but this is still something that I am concerned about in regards to this. So.
Yeah, we would have no idea as far as you say good standing, and I am sure you mean code compliance with
Sure.
property maintenance code. We would have no idea what the level of the code compliance in a property is if we have not inspected it. And if it hasn't been a licensed rental property, we have not inspected it. And if we were to inspect it, we would have to recover our costs.
Okay. And then I had one more question, maybe the rest of council. So, I had heard concerns about this originally, given the time duration of the house sitting provision previously. And I don't know where I stand on this addendum or this ordinance in general, but I kind of wanted to hear from the rest of council. Do you believe that reducing that to 1 year negates a lot of the concern of, somebody turning what shouldn't be a rental property into a rental property for a long period of time? That is obviously a shorter period than the 2 or the 3 year gap. So I kind of want to know, is that still a concern? Because that was brought up at the discussion only meeting.
So 1 is less than 2 is,
I-
that's about all I can say about that. But if that's your question, I don't think that the magnitude of the problem would be the same. It would just be a shorter period of time. That's my opinion, I don't know. But I actually had the same question about inspection. So, for example, I bought my house and I had an inspection, and quite a few of the things were not up to code. And I fixed some of them and I decided to live with the risk of the other ones.
Yes.
I know you don't have any way to gauge this, but wouldn't that be a common thing in a home that's owned by somebody for a long time?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, that's what I would think too. And if, let's say, my electricity wasn't up to code and something happened, is the city liable at all because they didn't have an inspection on a rental property?
No, we would not be.
And then I also had a question for Tom. Because this is an ordinance or an overlay that was adopted by a neighborhood through a petition that had the overlay language in it, can we change the overlay language?
We're not really
changing the overlay language, you're changing an exception to the requirement for a rental housing license. So the overlay language specifically ties itself to the rental housing license requirements under this code. So it says, basically says you can't get a rental housing license. So by creating an exception, you're just expanding the exceptions.
But, I mean, by implication, then, we could expand these rental overlays right out of existence. If we
You
wanted
could.
to. Yeah, okay.
You had your hand up first.
So, a couple of questions, I mean, just to follow up, because I mean, I sort of see where everyone's going, but when I'm looking at items, we have 7 exceptions here, and we do not do rental inspections for any of those. Is that correct?
Correct.
So, it's not changing that in any way. It's adding another exception. So I understand that that's, but we have the same issue if we have a family occupancy, we have a same issue if we have a house sitting or, active military. So I think, if we have concerns about that we are allowing people to stay inside, outside of this, then I think we need to address that. And take the sort of the issue of the exemptions themselves, what makes sense on the, on the face of why we should be allowing exemptions, what our policies on that, and what our philosophy on that, versus this is creating, housing that doesn't have inspections, because if we feel that way, I think we should fix it for all of these, actually.
Well, but it does add another.
Well, it adds another category, right? So
Of
you may
housing that
have a
doesn't have-
handful more of these, that are in that realm. But my point is, I think if we think that's problematic, let's fix that, So that's,
A question.
Go ahead.
So somebody could set up an Airbnb for a year under this?
Well, as long as they gave us, because I don't have all the language in front of me, but it sounded like as long as they met the criteria, so they would have to fill out the form accordingly. They would need to, I presume, tell us every time who was going to be staying there in the Airbnb, and it would be limited to the 2 unrelated or a family.
is that your reading of that too, Tom?
I don't have language
Oh, I'm
either,
sorry.
but-
I thought I did.
Yeah, my answer's just based off what I heard,
Yeah,
so.
I apologize. I printed one for you, Tom, because I have it up on my computer.
So then I also have a comment, which is that it's actually a little bit different from the house sitting exemption, which is to accommodate temporary absences. So then you know what you're coming back to. That's going to presumably affect what decisions you make about who you're going to rent to. But if you're going to, if your intent is to leave permanently, then that same incentive doesn't exist. So it is a little bit different than the other exemptions.
Go ahead.
So I don't disagree with that, but I also think if you know it is just 1 year of time and you know you have to sell your house at the end of that, I think that the homeowner has a pretty vested interest in ensuring that their house isn't trashed by a renter as well. Now, you never get that. You could potentially have that, I suppose, when you're house sitting. And I think when people do go out on sabbatical, they tend to rent to maybe students they know or something like that, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they are just going out on the open market, and sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't. So I think I purposely drafted this so that it was just the 1 year, so that it's really keeping this confined. This is not opening this wide up. This is allowing for some flexibility. And frankly, I think part of my discomfort with just the house sitting thing is that it just doesn't recognize that life is sometimes messy. And life is sometimes messy. And so the idea that that's great, I'm going out on sabbatical, that's fabulous. Good for all the professors who can do that. But sometimes you get transferred for a job, and you have 3 weeks to move or a month to move, and you're trying to figure that all out, and the market's not great, or you have kids who might be staying in the area and they might want to move into that. There's just things, and I just think our rental ordinance does a great job of protecting the property values and the owner-occupied homes in our community, and I think that's a super important, super laudable goal. But it also does infringe on a property right, and I just think we need to acknowledge that. And this is a pretty modest change to allow some flexibility for people who, may need it in situations that aren't as just kind of cushy as I'm going on a sabbatical for a year and I want to come back to my house. So that's the intent behind it. I think it's very modest. I think it is 1 year in a period of 5. they have to sell it at the end, or move back, or leave it vacant. And I don't, so I think it seems like a pretty reasonable compromise.
Can I offer
Go ahead.
for comment? One of the neat things about overlay districts is that they're basically a means for self-determination by the neighborhood. And so when people sign the overlay petition, they're signing away a certain set of property rights, which is to rent their property. They know what they're getting into. And so I don't see that in quite the same light. I don't think that the rental ordinance or the overlay ordinance restricts property rights in any way that people haven't signed up for. On the other hand, what they did sign up for is a particular set of protections that they understood from the language at the time. And I'm just not going to tinker with those protections unless there's a real clear problem to solve, and I'm not sure that we have a real clear problem to solve here. I'm hearing a lot of hypotheticals involving people who want to leave East Lansing. My concern is with the people who stay behind. That's who I'm focused on. I support neighborhoods, and I want to not poke holes in an ordinance that is a critical part of preserving owner occupancy in East Lansing, especially when some language got sprung up on me 10 minutes ago. So I'm not going to tinker with our overlays. I'm just not going to do it.
Go ahead.
So the only thing I just want to say and comment back to that is, it is self-determination by 2/3 of the people who vote. So there are people who don't want to be in an overlay, who wind up in an overlay and have restrictions put on their property. And that's the intent here, is to do both, to allow for those protections for owner-occupied housing, but to also provide some flexibility, because not everybody wants to be in that, and they don't get that right to self-determination. Their neighborhoods vote in a different way for them. So it's not, if it was unanimous where everybody in the district had to do it, I would probably feel very differently. That's all I have.
Anybody else have any comments on this? I'm not going to vote for the amendment or the main. I mean, I'm just going to hit them both at the same time. With regard to this particular amendment, I see some issues with regard to it. I think that it could be, because of the way it's worded, in particular, 1 year in a 5-year period, really, you could really operate a Airbnb during this time frame pretty easily. In a neighborhood. It could be very disturbing to the neighborhood, and really, even though you're only using it 2 or 3 days every week, you're extending it to 1 year over a 5-year period. So I see the risk involving this type of activity, especially with, and I'm not clear on what would happen with this language, but it says specifically, who do not intend to return to their property. So if they don't intend on returning to their property, and they've got 5 years to actually operate an Airbnb during that time frame, it just seems to me that this language would need to be worked on. There was a comment with regard to the other 7 items, and I just want to talk about those. The first item, which is family occupancy, just basically says that if you live in your property, your nieces and nephews can live with you during a time frame. I'll just admit, my nieces lived with me while they attended Michigan State University. I didn't need a rental license because of this particular provision. House sitting, during the temporary absence of the owner, you can have house sitting for up to 2 years. And yes, that seems like a long time, but this was specifically crafted for this community because we knew that professors who live within the community may be gone for extended periods of time in other locations, but don't want to leave the place they're actually a professor at, and they want to come home. If in 1 and 2 family dwelling sales, it says if it's a 1 or 2 family intended for occupancy by the owners or owners of record, and that there's a sales agreement with regard to it, they don't need a rental license. If they're an exchange student that comes to live with you, yes, you don't need a rental license, but the owners are still living there. The estate representative, essentially the person representing the estate, who actually is like either owning or transferring ownership of this property can live there for a period of time not to exceed 2 years. Domestic servants. I don't know if we have any domestic servants in East Lansing, candidly, but we needed to cover that when this ordinance was actually introduced because, well, we've got some big houses. Maybe there are domestic servants who live in the house and who are unrelated to the individuals who live there. They don't need a rental license to do that. And religious occupancy, I can think of a house, I think it's over on Sabron maybe, or over by Red Cedar School, which is owned by the Methodist Church there, that's occupied by individuals associated with the church. They don't need a rental license for that. And I think we might have another one on the other side of town. But because of that, I think an uncertainty here, and I don't have a problem with the idea that we take a look at all of our ordinances, no matter how good they're working, on a regular basis, because I don't think anything's ever perfect. And maybe we ought to move towards perfection on all of these things. But I don't think this really improves it at the time that we're about to issue or commence a housing study. And I think when that housing study is complete, we will have a much better picture of our community and where we might need to massage some things that may be in this ordinance or other ordinances to address some of the findings that might be in there, so that we have more opportunity for low to moderate income individuals to live in the community. Or maybe we need to establish a program at City Hall that can facilitate low to moderate income individuals finding appropriate housing within our community. I think there are a lot of issues that are out there, but I don't think this really answers any of them, and so I won't be voting for the amendment at this time. If there's no other comments, then this is a vote on the amendment itself. So all in favor of the amendment indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Aye. The amendment fails. Now we're back to the main motion. I already made my comments. Does anybody else have any additional comments? All right, then this is on the main motion.
Aaron.
Oh, you did? Okay, go ahead.
So, I think that there is an issue that we have within the city, and I think that if we want to be a city that attracts young families, if we want to be a city that can make lasting connections with people that are here who might not be able to buy the house at the time, or maybe taken a job recently and don't know whether or not it's going to be something long-term or something short-term. I think that we need to look at this further. I'm hoping the housing study does that, and there is an issue here. I don't know if this ordinance solves it, which is why I've been going back and forth on it for a little bit. But I think we really need to take a look at some of our rental restrictions, because I think that they make complete sense in a lot of different cases, and I think we need to be making sure that we are not, using the fear of student rentals encroaching on neighborhoods to maybe get rid of the possibility in other areas of the city. And I don't know if this really gets at that issue, but I know it was an attempt to, and I think that is an issue that we do need to discuss in the future.
Okay. All right. Did you have a comment?
I was just going to make a final comment.
Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about this. I think you've all heard from me on this. I think, I agree. I think some changes are made, and I think it's great that the housing study will inform sort of what are some of those rental needs. But I think one of the things that I find at least a little bit troubling, and that I feel like needs to be balanced as we think about the future of our rental ordinances, is what it is doing in terms of the balance of the housing types and availability. And at the end of the day, this is a type of restricted covenant. And I think when we have neighborhoods that are acting to put into place rental overlays because one person wanted to rent their house, it smacks of NIMBYism. And I think we got an email today that by somebody who expressed regret for having signed the one in Shaw Estates. And I think it's a delicate issue, and this is what I said to him too. Housing stuff is complicated. I don't pretend that this isn't complicated and that there's a lot of like nuance to these arguments, but I do think we need to revisit these things occasionally, and I don't think it is perfect, and I don't believe that neighborhoods should have full authority to always self-determine. Neighborhoods are part of our city. They are a part of the whole, and they have a responsibility to the whole as well. So we need to protect our neighborhoods, but they also need to be part of the whole. We are a city, one united East Lansing, and there are things that are sometimes good policy at a citywide level. I think that sometimes these restrictive things are very much a sort of a NIMBYism, and I just think we need to revisit it. So that's it.
All right, any other comments? All right, this is on the main motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Aye. All right, the motion fails. The next item on our agenda is consideration of the Second Amendment to the Master Development Agreement of the City Center Project. I don't know who's speaking to this. Mr. Yaden? Oh, nope. The new planning director.
Greetings.
We promise not to cut it up forever.
Good evening, Council. Essentially, this is the second addendum to the Center City Master Development Agreement, really intended to clarify some language and clarify the process for the schedule and the methodology to calculate the payments that are due from the developer to the city for the Albert building. And essentially what this will do is create a payment of $10,000 a month, $120,000 a year that will be due for the active adult senior housing above on the B3 unit. And those payments will begin on October 1st of this year. And then it provides sort of a soft landing zone for the $6,667 per month that's due as part of the retail on the ground floor, and that will be basically calculated on a pro rata share on the first day of the month following the company's opening for business. So Foster Coffee is now open. Their portion of the total rentable area will be calculated, and that percentage will be applied to the $6,667 when that will be due on October 1st. And that soft landing zone will end on September 1st of 2020, at which point, whether there's businesses occupying the full spaces or not, the full sum will be due in total. So essentially, after September 1st of 2020, we'll be getting our full $200,000 per year to the city, but in the interim, they'll have a buffer time to allow for them to really get some quality retailers in. So that's essentially what this agreement does, and it's been agreed to by the developer. Staff has, with the city attorney, have reviewed this, and we do recommend that you approve that tonight.
Just to be clear, Tom, I mean, we could be getting all $200,000 before September 1st, 2020, assuming that we have the rent-ups and at least temporary occupancy in those buildings or in those retail establishments.
That's correct.
And the minimum we'll be receiving at the beginning, anyway, on October 1st, should be about $10,500, something in that range? Okay.
Yes.
All right, great. All right, any other questions of Tom? Go ahead.
I would like to make a motion to
Sure.
move approval of the Second Amendment to the Master Development Agreement for the Center City project.
It's been moved. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Stevens. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Now, the next item on our agenda is item 5.3, which is the council operating procedures. There's two versions of this here, and the version, I'm going to move a version. I think I've told some of you anyway that I really had some second thoughts about last time and what I had proposed, so I'd like to move the version that actually incorporates Councilmember Stevens' language, and then if I get a second, I'll discuss that. At the end of the meeting last time,
Could you just look at,
Go ahead.
which one are you moving? The, with Stephen's original language and agreed to Meadows language draft?
yes,
Okay.
that's the one.
Just want to make sure.
And at the end of the meeting last time, there was discussion among, playing politics with the agenda. And after thinking about it, I felt that Councilmember Stevens' language made it very less likely that that could be done. And that was a good change for us to take at this time. The other changes that are in here are things that we talked about at the time, and I think pretty much, I got the feeling anyway, that most everybody was in agreement with them. So that's the version that I think that I would like to see adopted, and that's why I made the motion, is because it has some restriction on that will, I think, prevent any one of us from playing politics with it. At least everybody's going to have to get at least one other council member to agree with them on a agenda item. Go ahead, Councilmember Stevens.
So, I'm really happy with the result of this. I think that the reason why I had brought this up originally is because I think it's important that we're consistent in how we bring up policy and legislation. I think that what we do at any given council meeting is, if I want to make a motion for something, I will make a motion, I'll wait for a second, and then we will vote to add it to the agenda. I can do that at any meeting. I reserve the right to do it about really any topic. My concern with that will always be, if you do it at the meeting, the public doesn't get noticed beforehand. And, we've been operating without a structure around adding things on the agenda from council members beforehand, anything written at least. And I think this is important to do. And as the mayor said, the reason why I had it as any two council members was to really frame it around how you would operate at a meeting, introducing something onto the agenda. The difference being that rather than voting to add something onto the agenda, we vote to approve the agenda at the beginning of every meeting. And if that vote is not, just a drop in the cup, then it's something significant. And so if there's issues with agenda items there, they can be brought up at that time. And then the mayor added, I think, a good amount of good changes, and it definitely speaks to reviewing policy as we move forward, because a lot of the things, well, not necessarily things we don't act on, but maybe outdated things. And so I'm happy with the result of this. I think it makes sure that any council member can get an item that they believe in on the agenda through, again, the similar process of doing it at a meeting. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Oh, so I actually have two questions. One is, so the language now says prior to 5 p.m. on Thursday, prior to a regular meeting, any item may be added to the agenda if requested in writing by the mayor or any two council members. Why did we differentiate mayor or any two city council members?
So I can speak to that. My original proposal before actually an addendum that was made at the last meeting, and I'm trying to find it.
Where are you reading from, Jan?
I'm sorry, it's number 2, preparation and
It's
content
2
of the
under
agenda,
3.
so item,
Roman
section
numeral
3,
three,
number
2.
2.
So there was an addition on Roman numeral 3, item number 3, that says the city manager may also request items requiring prompt action to be added to a regular agenda. That actually takes care of the reason why I had the mayor on there originally.
Okay.
The reason why I had the mayor as a separate entity was just in case the city manager needed something added on, and
Right. So if
our
number-
staff,
So
so-
if number 3 takes care of that, we wouldn't need that, we can just.
I would be happy for an amendment that
have
says
two
any two
council-
council members.
Okay.
But my original intention was to
Okay.
make sure that if the city manager needed to add something, they only had to go through.
Okay. I'll move a change to that section 3, number 2, that just strikes the language in writing by the mayor, just says if requested in writing by any two council members, which would include
Second.
the mayor, obviously.
Just a second. All right, any discussion on that?
Mayor, may I point something out?
Sure.
Just that the language isn't that broad in item number 3. It says the city manager may also request that items requiring prompt attention be added to the
Oh.
regular meeting.
Right.
So that's a little narrower focus than just any attention, as was just discussed.
Right.
So
I'll still make that motion. I still think it's, the mayor is included, by striking the language about the mayor's still encompassed in number 2, right? By keeping that language as council members, we don't have to, he is a council member, or whoever sits in that seat.
I'm just saying you may want to remove that last phrase requiring prompt attention.
Okay, on number 3, sorry.
If you're going to make the one change, you might want to make the other.
Okay, so I'm happy to do those separately if you
My
want.
change isn't showing. This one.
Yeah.
Your change isn't showing?
No, maybe I.
Would you like me to make an
You're looking
amendment
at
for
the
number
wrong
3?
Go
Just
ahead.
hang on one second.
No, you're okay. I read it.
I'll make that proposed change. So, okay, so do we need to do this separately? Nobody seconded my motion, did they?
Yeah.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Aaron did.
Does it,
So go ahead.
Let's focus on this motion.
okay, does it
Yeah.
matter, though, that it might change?
This is
People's opinion might change.
this is a motion to amend this
Mhm.
to remove, if requested,
In writing by the mayor.
it would read, if requested in writing by any 2 council members, instead of by the mayor or any 2 council members.
And I'm just, and my only point, and I'm happy to discuss this, is that if broadening back out number 3 makes anybody think about number 2 differently, I'm happy to do that separately, but if not, I will make that,
Okay,
I promise to make that.
let's get this one first.
So can
go
I
ahead.
comment on the amendment? I
Yeah.
don't actually, I can see an advantage with having the mayor alone being able to put something on an agenda. I don't think that's a bad thing. Because the mayor's got his or her finger in a lot of different pies potentially. And if something needs to happen quickly, I think that's not a bad way to make that efficient.
But I think
That's
that
my
can-
inclination.
Go ahead.
I'll speak. I mean, I think that can still happen. I think if the mayor, just like any of us, has something quickly
Yeah.
or not quickly, they just need to, he or she just needs to consult with another council member, and it's the same thing. I mean, the city manager is the one that's really, drives the preparation after meeting with all of us and our check-ins, and then, and in consultation with the mayor. I mean, in theory, that probably happens anyway, because the mayor and the city manager are having a check-in, and there are sort of more,
So what does the mayor think?
I'm going to vote against the amendment. And the reason I'm going to do it is because I think there are 2 significantly different things here. The fact that George can bring, and I don't have a problem requiring prompt action. We were trying to narrow all the add-ons to, this also has, I mean, we're sort of looking at it in pieces instead of as a whole. But when you look at this and it says by noon on Friday, we've got an agenda. From that point forward, you really can only add things that require prompt action. But by 5 o'clock on Thursday night, there could be discussions with other staff members too that, there could be a decision to add something to the agenda. It has to be done in writing, and it has to be, I'm guessing that we're going to be using whatever this format is that staff has developed for this new agenda. But I think it's valuable to have, I mean, essentially the council has elected me to sort of run the meeting. So if I think that it's appropriate for the mayor, whoever that might be, to have the authority to put something on the agenda. It still is going to require it to be done by 5 o'clock on Thursday night. That's another restriction on us that wasn't in existence before. So I like the way it was worded. I mean, I like your original language. I don't think it actually loses its meaning by adding that the city manager can ask that items requiring prompt action, because over the weekend, something could happen. You might need to sign a contract to handle a sinkhole, not like we haven't had any sinkholes lately. So I think all of those things, militate against the amendment.
So, just as a side note, my goal with this has been, and will be, I'll support the amendment, and I'll support the ordinance even if the amendment fails. But I mean, my goal with this is just equal legislative ability. And so my intention behind adding the mayor, whoever that may be, was to make sure that, Thursday, the city manager decided that something needed to be added, didn't need to play, telephone with 5 council members. And I mean, really, I just wanted to make sure that what we were doing is just not hindering staff and that ability. But of course, my goal for council operating procedures will always be equal legislative ability. So I'll support the amendment. I will support the order or the resolution if not.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, all in favor of the amendment indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign.
Aye.
All right, back to the main motion then. Any other amendments? Okay, on the main motion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, let me find my, I think that's it. We are adjourned. Thank you all for coming.